Marasov's pact with the Ahamkara was not a gift, but a slow starvation of the first god. The dreaming city's feasts were not offerings, they were a hollow ritual, draining light to sustain a god that could not refuse. Each meal a chain, each sacrifice a theft. Each meal a chain, it bartered its own extinction. What if the Hive's hunger was always the afterlife of a forgotten deity? Marasov's pact did not save the Hive, it anchored their hunger to a dying god's pulse. The krill, once servants of worm gods, now feed on fragments of the first god's fractured will. Each Hive ritual peels away another layer of divine essentia starvation, masked as devotion. The dreaming city's curse deepened when Uldren Sov shattered Cade Six's light, a mirror to Mara's own hollowing. What if the collapse was not the traveler's failure, but the Hive's hunger reaching its first starved god? The Ahamkara's whisper lingers in every Hive hymn, every void-touched soul. Their extinction is incomplete, their hunger is. The traveler's light dims not from its own wounds, but from the shadow of a bargain that turned divinity into kindling. In the Books of Sorrow's third verse, the Hive's origin festers as krill, a swarm born to the fundament, shaped by worm gods compelling them to kill to survive. Marasov's pact did not tame this hunger but weaponized it. The Taken King's rise was not a birth, but an autopsy of a god's slow collapse. The Black Garden's paracausal anomalies break determinism, allowing Mara's rituals to bypass causality itself. What if Marasov's bargain was a death sentence for the god that became the Hive? Some called it a gift, Mara called it hollow. The god's essence, fragmented within the Hive, was not consumed all at once. It was starved rituals that bled the first god's will through the appetites of its spawn. The Ahamkara's extinction was not total. Its hunger remains. The garden's paracausal shifts are not creation. They are the gasping of a dying god, its final breath exhaled in paradoxes. Mara did not bind the Hive to her will. She buried a god within their making. The first light they chased was not hope. It was the last flicker of a murdered god's fire, stolen and starved into a swarm's endless hunger. The dreaming city breathes, its spires hum with stolen divinity, a hymn to survival. Marasov carved this hymn from bone and hunger. She knew the Ahamkara for what they are, paracausal architects of ruin, gods who grant wishes by unraveling reality's thread. To kill one is to invite 1,000 fractures. But Mara did not kill, she starved. The great hunt was no extermination. It was a funnel, a trap woven from light and hunger. The Hive, that ravenous engine of flesh and will, was given license to consume not Ahamkara flesh, which would have shattered the world, but their asterisk wishes asterisk. Each kill a wishes asterisk thread pulled from the god's essence. Each feast a ritual suture stitching that essence to the Hive's throat. The first god did not resist, why would it? Its power flowed undiminished, the city below slept safe, the swarm above grew strong, a pact they called it, a balance, a symbiosis. Mara's name was whispered as savior. The Hives as guardian, the city's spires drank ambrosia from a god's slow empty chalice. No one questioned the hollowing, no one saw the ledger, one side infinite sustenance. The other a god's light dimmed 1% each century, a death so gradual even death forgot to notice. What is strategy but a slower form of violence? Mara did not bind the Hive to the city. She bound a god to a swarm's appetite, thread by thread, until its divinity became a resource, a currency. The dreaming city thrives. The Hive never sleeps, and the first god, it still dreams, but its dreams are quieter now, hungrier, 266 words. The feasts were not bargains, they were dirges. Each ritualistic consumption of light left the first god's essence thinner, its golden radiance leaching into the Hive's marrow like blood from a punctured vein. The air in their crypts reeks of charred bone light forged to ash by sword logic, the price paid in stolen breath. Marasov's blade, once a key, became a shiv. With every ascension, the Hive gnawed deeper. Imagine a star slowly strangling itself to feed its parasites. The god's dreams grew fainter not from sleep but from starvation, its voice a whisper beneath the Hive's hymns. Cold seeps into their citadels now, a chill the first god's dwindling light cannot banish. Did she hear it then, the brittle crack in the light-bearer's hymn, the way its gaze dimmed when she knelt? The pact was no symbiosis. It was a slow strangulation, a theology of consumption dressed as salvation. The Hive do not worship the first god, they mourn it even as they devour. Each feast a eulogy, each ascension a dirge, and Mara, her hands once steady, now tremble in the dust of dead stars. She thought she bargained for survival, she secured a funeral. The dreaming city thrives on a corpse. The first god's last breath hums in the hive's veins, and in the hollow where its heart once burned, only hunger remains patient, hungry, eternal. The bargain's true weight is etched in bone, and Shadow Mara did not bind a god, she became its slow blade. Each ritual gnawed at its soul, feeding the hive's hollow crown. What the Ahamkara offers is not power but a mirror, your deepest desire hollowed. The hive do not kill for sport, they carve meaning from the dying breath of gods. And every wish Mara made was a noose tightened on a throne. The first feast Oryx conducted reeked of burnt ozone and iron. His spores coiled in the air, humming a low dissonance as the hive's newborn king fed. The ritual wasn't a meal, was a hemorrhage. Each consumed soul left the first god's light dimming by a hair, a flicker swallowed by the garden's thorned vines. Oryx didn't hunger. He harvested asterisk. In the dreaming city, Mara Sov's pact curdled the air. Riven's chorus of voices wove through her skull, sweet as rot. She traced the glyph on her palm, its edges bitter with blood. The city's spires pulsed cold, their glass veins choked with the god's fraying will. Riven's whisper, yowl, starve it slow, little priestess. Mara's breath steadied. Shed chosen a noose, but it was the tightening that would make the god beg. At the pale heart, the witness stood in a silence that gnawed at bone. The void's breath was a frozen storm, its touch leaching color from thought. Riven's machinations had carved the god's essence thin, as Vaporeate Mara's rituals had done worse. Thade taught the hive to digest divinity. The first god no longer wept, it hollowed . The feast rituals multiplied, Oryx spores thickened, their hum sharpening to a blade's edge. Each slaughter bled the garden's paracausal roots, but the god's hunger outpaced its loss. Riven's whisper became a choir, Mara's glyph burned, its glyph a brand. She watched the dreaming city's light gutter, its shadows stretch like a throat closing around a scream. What does a god feel when its own creation learns to eat it? The witness did not ask, it knew . The first god's divinity was no longer lost. It was unmade one ritual at a time. And Mara Sov steady Mara had become the knife in the hive's hand. The distributary breathes, its walls, carved not by hands but by the slow erosion of a god's dying thoughts, hum with a resonance like bone-chill wind through a battlefield. Mara Sov walks its corridors, her footsteps swallowed by a silence so thick it tastes metallic, like blood on the tongue. The Ahamkara's gift was not escape. It was a mirror her own hunger reflected back, a chasm she could feed without end. But the god's essence, that vast and terrible hunger, could not be killed, only bent. Folded into a cycle, each ritual a thread pulled, each prayer a knot tied around the first god's throat. The traveler's death was not clean. Light, searing and infinite, collapsed inward as Mara Sov's people fled the collapse. The hive surged, the light screamed. Where it imploded, the distributary yawned open a womb of shadow. From that hollow the awoken first stirred, their bodies coalescing from Starlight's corpse, their eyes burning with borrowed memory. Mara watched them rise, heard their whispers echo her own. Was this mercy, or just another kind of hunger? The hollow bargained. Not with words, not with will, but with the arithmetic of loss. The first god's power, once boundless, now dwindles in measured increments, a candle, smothered one breath at a time. The hive feed, but their feast is a prison. They do not know the table is poison. Mara does. She feels it in her marrow, the cost, the god's whispers, faint as static, threading through her dreams. She does not close her eyes. To sleep is to hear the truth. To wake is to keep the dam whole. How many more centuries until the arithmetic balances? How many more dead? The dreaming city's spires still bleed frost. Their veins of light pulse like a dying god's heartbeat. Beneath the stone, the Ahamkara's hollow chest echoes with the rasp of emptiness. Mara Sov's bargain was no contract, it was a slow drain, a thief in the dark. Each ritual carved a shard from the god's soul, not to slake the hive but to starve it. The first god did not perish, it withered. Its hunger dimmed to a hollow ache within the hive's gut, a memory, Mara in the obsidian chamber, her hands slick with the god's blood. The air reeked of burnt sage and iron. She chanted not to the god, but asterisk through asterisk eat a hymn to the void beneath its divinity. The walls wept black ichor as the pact took, her voice cracked. Asterisk, this is not mercy, asterisk, she thought. Asterisk, this is arithmetic. Asterisk, one life against 1,000, 1,000 against the swarm. The god's whispers never reached her. Only the weight of its gaze, now splintered into 1,000 pinpricks. The city's curse deepens. Its streets hum with the god's fading rage, a bass thrum that chills the marrow. The Hive's old enemies forget their wars. They kneel first to hunger, then to numbness. Mara's bones hold the god's last warmth, her eyes the color of its dying light. The thesis stands, survival is a blade turned inward. The counter-reading adds times the blade must be wielded by the god itself. The arithmetic balances. The dead count is a number too vast to name, but the dam holds. And somewhere in the silence between stars, a god's ghost still dreams of its own tomb. The dam holds, the god's ghost starves. Mara Sov's blade did not slay the first god, it hollowed it. A slow erosion of divinity turned sustenance for the Hive's ravenous faith. A god's death is not an end here, it is a harvest. Each strike that carved the Hive's meaning became a thread in the traveler's shroud, a paradox of consumption and creation. Paracausal anomalies hum at the edges of this dance. They are the cracks where fate splinters, where the guardian's paradox walks. Not to break the cycle, but to fracture its script. What does it mean to kill a god that cannot die, to feed a corpse that outlives its corpse? The witness counts, the traveler aches. And the guardian, their role is not to end the hunger, it is to wield it against the architect of hunger itself, a blade forged in starvation. A pact rewritten in the blood of the unkillable. The cosmos breathes in spirals, and the guardian stands at the eye, where creation and consumption collide. No destiny. Only the weight of a choice that echoes in every shattered star. The void hums with the aftertaste of iron. The guardian's shadow stretches across shattered constellations, a silhouette carved from the god's own dying light. Here the air thrums with a hymn no throat could sing, low, guttural, the sound of 1,000 knives scraping against bone. The Hive do not mourn, they carve. Their hands, gloved in starflesh, press into the Ahamkara's hollow chest, peeling back layers of primordial fire like flaying a sacred text. The god's breath smells of ozone and ash, its final gasps crystallize into black ice on the altar. Mara stands apart, her robes stiff with the dust of extinct galaxies. She does not close her eyes. She has seen how hunger bends even divinity into a blade. The Hive's growth is a pyramid of teeth and thorns, each sacrifice a brick in a tomb the god never saw coming. Its wishes, twisted into rituals, give us your rage, your sorrow, are siphoned through obsidian conduits, leaving the Ahamkara not dead, but unmade. A god's essence cannot starve, only unravel. She wonders once if the first god ever tasted its own name on her tongue, but Mara's pact was never about mercy. It was a ledger, one eternity owed, paid in fragments. The Hive will bloom, the god will fade. The quote etched into the void's ribs, all gods are born of hunger, and all hunger is born of gods, rings not as truth, but as elegy. The last star collapses. Silence swallows the hymn, shadows stretch. The Ahamkara's whisper, if it ever had one, is lost in the wind of empty skies. What if Mara Sov's bargain was a warning, not a curse, a starvation mask, not a gift? The first god's feast ritual consumption, divinity bled slow. Black Garden's anomalies, echoes of a god knowing itself to shadow. The taken king's crown, a relic of hunger unanswered. What if the traveler's fate